Hi everyone, and welcome to the 13th in our series on commentaries on the crisis, in which we're intending to bring insight into the way businesses are changing, the stages of that change, and how we can recognize these stages, and how we as HR and finance professionals need to be reacting to those changes. What we should be looking for, and what we are hearing from other industries, which we can apply learnings to our own businesses ourselves. So we'll be focusing today on actually the second stage of the crisis. So the early stage, the reactive stage, the chaotic stage, we will cover a little bit, but we're going to be mainly focusing on the restarting and the replanning of our businesses. So I'm delighted today that Sarah Mason is joining us, and as Cheif People Officer at Foxtons, Sarah's somewhat been in the eye of the storm in terms of a sector which has entirely closed down, then reopened, then all that kind of stuff. Well, I don't quite know, but Sarah's going to explain to us in detail what's happened there. So welcome, Sarah, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, yes, could you actually start by telling us a little bit about Foxtons, what you do, what your geographical spread is, and yes. So tell us about Foxtons.
Bit about Foxtons. Well, I can talk about Foxtons all day, obviously, live and breathe it. So Foxtons, we're London's leading estate agent. We do residential for both sales and lettings, and we're really focused on service for our customers. So just in London, we've got a really wide reach of branches in London. We're focused on this kind of network of branches, about 60 approximately across London, and that we're kind of focused on exceptional service underpinned by our reach, also our people. We're really proud of the people that work for us and our culture. And then finally, technology. Quite unusually for an estate agency, we're underpinned by a lot of leading technology to enable us to deliver to customers. And our overall goal is always to be the best place for our customers to find the best place to live, or to unleverage or unlock the value of their property. So approximately about headcount for all the HR types out there, about 1,100 people, very much a branch network with a big head office supporting that reach.
Yes, so so it's London-based largely. So that kind of meant that I guess you guys had a kind of bit of a double whammy. Not only are you in the industry which is highly impacted in the early stages, but also you're in London, where I guess transport and stuff like that also made it almost impossible to continue. So can you tell us a bit about your reflections on that early, first reactive, chaotic stage? What happened to you and the team?
It was a bit chaotic, is a good word to describe it. When I say chaos, I think we had lots of lack of clarity. You know, the government legislation came in kind of drips and drabs and often wasn't very clear, quite opaque at the beginning. And us HR types are quite used to having things nailed down. So policies and legislation on the hoof and at pace, quite interesting. So first phase, London property market, and effectively we're like a retail operation because we have lots of shops or branches that had to be closed pretty quickly. We got past that quite quickly. We did quite a bit of scenario planning before it happened. So we were in the pre-lockdown phase where everyone was saying, you know, is lockdown going to happen? You'd seen it in other countries. So we knew it was coming. So we did a bit of scenario planning, making sure we had the right tech and laptops ready to get people working from home, beefing up some of our internet bandwidth, getting ready for pushing people out to home working. The only thing that was challenging there is actually it's hard to sell a property when people don't walk around it. So shifting towards virtual viewings before the lockdown happened. And then as soon as lockdown happened, it was very kind of vague, wasn't it? It suddenly switched off. We went into kind of that kind of crisis mode, getting people to work from home. We furloughed people quite quickly as well, because we knew the market was going to take a hit while the property market was in that kind of state of flux. So furloughed a bunch of people, relevantly, actually, given the fact the market was down, and then got anyone working from home who could. So super quick, very agile. As a company, we've got quite entrepreneurial roots. So we don't hang around and making decisions. We're really pacey. So that kind of fitted for us, I think. Weirdly, that play to our strengths where we can move quickly.
As far as I remember, the lockdown in being able to trade, etc., kind of happened in dribs and drabs in the sector, where it was later announced that you couldn't sell properties, for example. So transactions could not occur, as far as I understand. And then at the same time, there was complications about the lettings business in terms of letting holidays, rent holidays, and all this kind of stuff. So I seem to remember that these didn't all happen in one go and clarity appeared. Was that how it felt, Sarah?
It felt there was some things that turned off quicker than others. There was a lot of noise in the press about the property market had shut down, where actually a lot of things were still happening behind the scenes. You know, as long as properties were vacant, that was okay to proceed with. You know, so there's quite a bit happening behind the scenes. The press made a big field day of the fact there's no property. Actually, there's still quite a lot of transactions happening, all happening in line with governance, if that makes sense. And whilst you couldn't go into a property, you could very much do virtual viewings, and that's where the market is shifting very much now. People are more likely to rent a property using a virtual viewing than to buy one. You know, there's a big difference there in terms of that. People are happy with a short-term let to go and have a look at it online as opposed to walking around it when you're buying it. But there's still a shift to virtual, particularly with overseas investors. They're quite happy to spend by virtual viewing. So there are still transactions happening, just a different way of doing business. And actually, going back to your point about mortgage holidays, again, part of the Foxtons group is we've got a mortgage broking company called Alexander Hall, and that was useful for them. Suddenly they were noticing lots of people wanting to remortgage or extend, but we, of course, complexities for our managed lettings book. So for instance, you suddenly had tenants saying, I'm furloughed, I can't pay, why should I pay if my landlord's taking a break? And then we had to negotiate that between landlord and tenant. You know, how do we make sure they come to an agreement that works for both parties? So that was a part of our business that we saw it was incredibly busy, still is. How do we manage that, the rent arrears? How do we make sure the landlord gets what they need and the tenant gets what they need? And that's typically what estate agents do. There's a brokering role in that sense. And that really helped. It meant that we could make a difference and help people with that.
The material was unfamiliar. The kind of conversations were new to many of the negotiators, etc. But the actual role of being the broker between the two parties, the renting, the tenants and the landlords, was still the same kind of role. It was still being that honest broker between the two. The two areas, just with really complicated guidance and people in distress, I guess as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's kind of two parts to this, isn't it? You've got for this webinar, as it were, you've got the property side of it, how we deal with customers, and then we've got the people side of it, what that means from an HR point of view, and legislation underpins both of them. We need to know exactly what government requires so we can stick to it. We're a PLC, we're an incredibly well-known brand. Whenever you read an article about a state agency in the press, I guarantee you'll have a Foxtons board as a picture in the press. We're generally used as, you know, the poster boy for a state agency in London, super well known. We do everything by the book. You know, we have corporate governance coming out of our ears and legislation. So we had to become experts on the legislation, which was tricky because it changed every other day. You know, Boris Johnson would announce a new bit of legislation either on the furlough scheme or on the property market. So we've had to become really good at getting the legislation right, and we're happy to kind of, you know, invest money with lawyers and make sure we're doing everything perfectly. And we've done the same with health and safety in our branch as well. Really, really key for us.
It's very interesting, I think, because a lot of businesses I've been talking to over the last 13 weeks have said that their legislation was moving at a certain pace, but clarity was not rapidly enough. Trade bodies, associations, etc., were filling in some of that gap, but actually the third gap of setting their own agenda, setting their own interpretation of the rules, became something which we had to do very rapidly, and also which we're not used to. And I guess that was really true with your team.
Yeah, that's a great point. We had to look through the legislation through three lenses, actually. One was, what does the government require, which trumps everything really. That's the law. We've got to stick to that. The second lens we'd look through would be, what does our industry body require? Property Mark is our industry body, and their guidance was slightly different from the government. Different guidance on things like use of PPE, gloves and masks. The government would say one thing, Property Mark had a different viewpoint. So there's already some difficulty there. And then finally, through the lens of our customers, They may not agree with government guidance. In fact, a lot of people aren't agreeing with what the government want us to do. So we had to kind of navigate between those three different expectations to make sure we could still keep everyone happy, operate legally, and do business.
Right, yes, because presumably, yes, because each of those pressures are different. Some customers are presumably incredibly gung-ho and are like, pick me up, take me to see properties, I want to have a really good look around. And then other ones are very cautious that this is the whole new experience.
Completely. And funny enough, I think during this lockdown, if it's taught us anything, certainly taught me many things, because it's been a very busy time. I think everyone in HR has been on a steep learning curve, but it certainly taught me or reminded me the tolerance around difference. Some people are very happy to not wear a mask and meet all their mates. Other people are going to be hibernating, and that's fine. What we couldn't do is accept what our customers said and said, oh no, I don't need to wear a mask, or it's okay for you to give me a lift. We'd have to say, sorry, the government have stipulated this and we've got to stick with those guidelines. And historically, we've always driven our customers around different properties to view. That's what makes it an enjoyable process. We can show them 3 or 4 properties, they get a good understanding of what they're looking for. We can't have them in our cars at the moment. We can't have our customers and give them lifts. Uber can, but estate agents can't. And we're hopefully going to get some clarification on that soon, now things are easing up. But for now, that is always going to be a bit of a barrier. It's quite difficult to see lots of properties. No one's particularly prepared to walk, half an hour. So that's one of the barriers we've had since lockdown.
And it's also a face-to-face business. So there's a lot of use of tools like this, Zoom, etc., between the negotiators and potential buyers and sellers. How does it work?
Well, we still tend to be very phone-based, actually. Still lots of phone calls. However, where it becomes virtual is viewings are done virtually, so we can showcase videos or pictures of the property as opposed to a walkthrough. That's made a huge difference. But it has required us to change our behaviour. So traditionally, our negotiators, what we call our estate agents, would call it on the sofa. They'd sit on the sofa with a potential seller and talk about how much that property's worth and and all the details. Actually, it's very difficult to do when you're 2 meters apart, wearing a mask, talking about someone's precious home, quite tricky. So that doesn't mean we take the masks off, they're staying on in line with government guidance, but it means we have to take that conversation back to the office over the phone when we can have a really good chat about it. But we've had to adapt the way that we'd normally do business quite dramatically. In fact, I was just going to jump in, there's 3 different sets of guidelines we've had to stick to actually. It's not, if you think about most companies will have one, there's a set of guidelines for office workers and contact centres. There's another set of guidelines for entering people's houses, which is what estate agents have to do, and a third set of guidelines for warehouses. Obviously, we have a huge fleet of cars, our famous Foxtons minis, so we've had to go through all 3 of those guidelines to make sure we're doing things by the book.
Yes, yeah, very interesting. Now, everybody attending, please, thank you very much for coming this morning. There is a questions box on the screen, so please submit your questions as we go along, and then in a little while we'll start looking at those questions together. So this is all, the crisis itself started with that chaotic phase. It was very hard to see what was going on, and we all remember it's a historical period now because, here I am in the office, you are in the office, and there's a certain amount of going back. I think it's a very skeleton team I've got in today. There's myself and a couple of others, and I'm sure it's the same with yourself. But how is the reopening coming on? So what stage are you at? What's worked and what hasn't worked, and what are your thoughts on the reopening, Sarah?
Well, we had quite an interesting reopening phase. I don't know if you remember Boris Johnson's famous speech. It's been highly parodied. He came on telly, didn't he, and said, "Go to work, don't go to work, go to work." What do people do? And so he had his famous speech where he had a very opaque set of instructions for people, and that was on the Sunday. On the Monday, then said, "Don't go to work. Only those who need to be in work should." And on the Tuesday, he said, "Oh, by the way, tomorrow all your estate agents can open up again." It's like, wow, we had 24 hours notice. Suddenly, all our competitors opened up the next day. I'm not naming names, that'd be mean of me, tempting though it is. We didn't open up the next day, we waited 2 weeks. We wanted to get our risk assessment done, get the social distancing measures in, get all our COVID-19 secure training done. So we did things by the book, and we're really pleased with that, because first of all, it's important to keep things legal. And secondly, it reassured our staff that we were taking extra measures. So that meant returning our staff back was much easier than we thought it would be, because they'd seen how long we'd waited. We didn't go, right, tomorrow in you come, don't worry about it, just get yourself in the office. We said, no, we're going to have 2 weeks, we're going to wait. Even if that means we miss out on business, that's okay. Safety is really important. And we gave our staff the reassurance that we're doing things by the book. I mean, things like one-way systems and stickers everywhere, and people really care about that. They care about their safety, and our customers care about it too. So the reopening, we gave ourselves a bit of time to do it, which hopefully reassures our customers and our employees, and it meant that we were all quite comfortable with that. We then unfurloughed some staff, so we've got the right number back in the office transacting, and we had a load of people dying to come back. Actually, we're generally a sales-driven organisation. They like, we call it our Foxtons family, which I know is a bit cheesy. Everyone says they're family-based. We generally have a bunch of people who love working together, lots of buzz in the office, both in head office where I'm today and in our branches. So predominantly, apart from a few vulnerable people who are worried about shielding or family, most people were delighted to come back and see their colleagues. That was great.
Oh, that's really good. And has that continued? So when did that happen? So what was the opening day for Foxtons?
It was literally 2 weeks after Boris Johnson's speech, probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, but we did it in stages. The first week we had a very small number back in head office. Before we opened up the branches, we had a small number back in head office, tiny amount of people. I think it was about 20 in a building that fits 350, just to see how that worked in terms of the one-way systems, queuing for kitchens, how does it work with all the deep cleaning, making sure that worked for everyone and we could get their feedback on it. So first week, small amount, pilot group, second week a few more, third week a few more. So we did it over a 4-week period, slowly reintroduced. And as people came back in, the people who'd been there for a week then could say, oh, don't worry, there's extra microwaves over there, there's no queuing, or this is how we're doing it with the lifts. And we had all the training in place and used our digital learning platform to make sure that everyone knew the way things should work. And that seemed to be the best way of doing it, not rushing, doing it in a staggered approach, loads of training, loads of comms. Worked well.
So, I mean, the Foxtons have spent a lot of time and effort on creating a end-to-end experience for customers. You've got your famous, we've all seen them if we haven't been in them, the shops which look like cafes where it's very spacious, there's sofas and there's, I don't know if there are any desks at all actually, but it seems that the negotiators are kind of walking around and maybe occasionally using desks. And there's obviously a lot of investment in getting that right. What is, if I walked into a store tomorrow, what is different? So what do you notice and what sticks with you, Sarah, about how has that experience changed today if I walk in?
And those cafe-style offices, interestingly enough, they're part of the Foxtons brand. I remember years ago living in Balham, before I worked at Foxtons, seeing one on the high street going, we've got a fridge full of posh water and Diet Coke. That's the Foxtons brand is very well known for these cafe-style offices. So much so, we get quite a few people walk in thinking they're cafes. They come in and ask for a coffee, and we go, no, we sell houses. You can kind of have a coffee if you buy a house, kind of thing. So they're not cafes, they're cafe style, but they are massive, right? So they were massive because we obviously extended hugely in a small period of time. So for a while, before we floated, before the IPO, we went from 25 offices to 60 very, very quickly, really, really quickly. And as a result, offices where you might have had 20 people crammed in them, suddenly, or branches, suddenly had maybe 5 or 6 people in them. And for the last year, it's felt like they're rattling around a bit. But you know what? It's brilliant for social distancing. We've got plenty of room in our branches for people to spread out, 2 meters. And if you walk past a traditional estate agent, like a boutique one on the high street, they're quite small, they're not big, and that'd be very hard to fit many people in there. We've got loads of space. Works in our favour. We've got plenty of space in offices and capacity to fit quite a lot of people in. What's been interesting, I spoke to one of our area directors just before I came in here and said, how's it going with everyone spreading out? And he said, we actually prefer it. We might keep it like that. We might, instead of having everyone sitting close together on one table, spreading them out 2 meters apart, gives everyone their own space. It feels like the office is fuller, and we quite like that. So actually that's really worked in our favour, having space to move out, giving people a bit of breathing space. The challenge is always maintaining our culture. A big part of our culture is getting all our branches together in their divisions or areas, so north or south or west, getting people together. Previously, we'd have 70 people going to one area, cramming in, lots of celebration of success. maybe some drinking, a little bit of that going on, lots of fun, part of our culture. These days now we have to do it over Skype. So again, the area director I spoke to earlier on, he's planning for his teams, even though they're doing their kind of Friday meeting over Skype, there'll be pizza sent to every single office. There'll still be some fun. They'll just do it in a socially distanced way. But our culture is still really, really important to us. And people come to Foxtons and stay at Foxtons because they enjoy working there. And we can't lose that. It's really important.
It is really interesting though, because whichever way you look at it, in the end, Foxtons is in part a sales-led organisation, and a lot of sales organisations, the ones which we work with, etc. Part of creating performance, motivation, etc., is actually sitting closely with your team and your team leader, etc. And actually that kind of buzz and drive created by being in a busy environment, being actually in quite close quarters, and actually, in some cases, making the calls, having the conversations, etc., is generated by that togetherness. And that's something which is a lot of businesses are finding hard to replicate. So how are you guys kind of tackling that and continuing to drive that feelings which drives performance, of course?
Well, part of it is the challenge around working from home. And I think we did lots of research at the start to go, which roles can work from home and which roles can't. Some of it is due to the nature of the job. So an estate agent can't work from home if they've got to literally let someone into a property and hand over keys, right? It's a bit like being, I don't know, working in retail or a bank. You've got to be there sometimes. So some roles it's challenging to work from home. Other roles, there's a challenge working from home because we haven't got the technical setup. We're London focused, and I've worked in international businesses before where their tech is amazing. Everything's video conference. You speak to Singapore last thing at night, first thing in the morning, or Sydney. So as a result, they've got the tech to support it. Because we're London based, whilst we've got technology to support the customer side, we've never really needed video conferencing before now. So getting that set up was quite key. But however, sales teams really do tend to work better in a pack. Having a group of people working together, great for environment. If they're dispersed, all sitting in their bedroom on their own at home, that's quite a challenge. And again, we've got quite a young workforce, and our young workforce do tend to work in shared houses, sometimes with shared communal areas, don't have a desk to sit at. They're sitting in a kitchen, with someone coming in making a cup of tea when they're trying to make calls. That's not conducive really to working. And that's why I think, again, another factor for people keen to come back to work, they actually like being in the office. It's easier than, trying to scrabble about sitting on their bed or at a kitchen table. That can be quite tricky. And I think a lot of people have found that with the working from home element.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess because your main offices are all in London, then physically for some people, it's a challenge to get into the office in a reopened position. So are you staggering teams? Are you staggering start and end dates for people? Are you being more flexible in that way at all, Sarah? How's that work?
We looked at in head office. First of all, our branches, there is no problem at all because they all drive. Everyone's got a car. Estate agents, by their very nature, have a car. So there's no anxiety about the tube there. They get in their car and they get into work and they've all got a parking space. That's absolutely not a problem at all. The kind of branch element. People in head office. Our head office is Chiswick Business Park. So whilst it's a lovely, lovely place to work, they're not big skyscrapers, they're quite low buildings. I know a lot of the banks, I read in the FT this week, Credit Suisse particularly, they calculated it might take 90 minutes to 4 hours in queues to get people into the 23rd floor. We haven't got that problem in a head office here. There's only a 6th floor building and we're on ground floor and first floor. So first of all, we haven't got some big skyscraper to worry about. Secondly, where we have got a group of people coming in at the same time in our property management division, the people who deal with our managed lets and kind of help with fixing boilers and check-in and check-outs, we have staggered them and we made it voluntary. People could say which slot they wanted to come in at, but we really haven't seen any problems with it. Most people tend to rock up to work at different times anyway. Some people are early birds, some people come in a bit later, and we haven't seen, surprisingly, too much of an issue. I was envisaging queues outside the building, and we did lots of scenario planning about the lifts, and it hasn't come to fruition actually. We've got some staggered times, but most of the time it's got a small amount of people in a building that's for 350 people. We've probably got about maybe 100 here. It's worked out just fine.
Yeah, without actually giving instructions, the teams themselves have worked out ways to make that work. That's really interesting. I've seen that in an awful lot of our conversations are actually that instructions from the top are great, but seen more and more not as the rule of law, but more as guidance. And then because of everyone's individual circumstances, I'm sure there are Foxtons branches which are different from other ones, that people have autonomy to do the sensible thing on a local position. And this is a massive change, I think, moving forward, that for so many businesses which have been rigid, actually this removal of that rigidity is something which they're really often actually really appreciating.
Yeah, and I think autonomy...
Can I just jump in? Sorry, guys. I just wanted to... There's a couple of questions on culture, so I wanted to come back to that point, actually. One, you know, Sarah, you were saying your culture is really strong. I know you were saying the other day on the pre-call that, you know, even when you gave people the choice to wear kind of shorts and flip-flops, people still come in their suits, which I just love. And some people on the webinar are saying, you know, do you measure culture? Is that something that you can just, you know, you can just feel, or do you do anything to measure it? And are there any tools or technology that you use for culture and I guess engagement as well?
That's a great question. And culture and engagement are interestingly lumped in together. I've always loved the model, the cultural web. So Johnson and Scholes is a very good way of measuring culture. And I think a lot of people say you can't measure culture. You can measure pretty much anything, a psychologist will tell you. So the cultural web's a great model. It looks at things like rituals, symbols, power, influence, you know, how decision making is made, structures. In terms of the way we measure our culture, we've looked at some of these things, you know, and again, dress code's a big measure of our culture. I don't think we've ever let people wear flip-flops, if I'm honest with you, Becky. I don't think we've ever definitely offered flip-flops, but when we've talked about, you know, people taking their ties off in the summer, some people like to keep them on. We are an estate agent, and we're unashamedly traditional in that sense. So our dress code is quite a big part of our culture. So when we go out in Chiswick Business Park at lunchtime, it's a big lake, you know, people sit in deck chairs. It looks a bit like a Google campus, very cool. You can spot our Foxtons crew a mile off because they're the ones wearing suit and tie. You know, everyone else is chilling out in their summer gear, but we are, you know, that's a very big symbol of our culture. Professional, premium, you know, we like to present a certain image. It's really, really important. How we measure that is through our engagement survey. So we do an engagement survey every year. We get ridiculously high scores. And I say ridiculous because it's been a really challenging market. We've had Brexit for 3 years. You know, it's been a tricky time for estate agents. And then this happened, you know, it's kind of a bit of a double whammy. So despite a challenging market, we've still had engagement scores of 83%, you know, maintained it over a tough market. You know, sales is a tough job. We hire lots of, you know, people at entry level, you know, rookie level, and they come into a difficult job in a challenging market and they do a brilliant job of it. And we still manage to get great engagement scores. And that's because people generally like working with their mates. It's a great culture.
And the uniform, it's almost like the suit is like a uniform, and the uniform gives you that sense of purpose. So I think, you know, in the crisis, again, this was something that came up with one of our other speakers around people really needing purpose at this time. And it's almost like I think that culture and wearing the suit probably gives people a stronger sense of purpose, perhaps.
And I think purpose is a really important piece here. And I think one of our purposes here as an estate agent is genuinely to be the best place for someone to find their home or property, or the best place for them to unlock the value of their property. That's quite a noble purpose. We do an important job, and we do help people find a home or enjoy their investment. That's quite important for what we do. Another key purpose we've had over the lockdown is that because we manage people's properties, we look after things like keys, and we can help let in tradesmen. So if, for instance, you've got a frontline worker, and a number of our customers are frontline workers, say a doctor, they don't want to have to be coming back from their shift in the hospital just to let someone in to fix a boiler. We can do that. And that's been great during the lockdown, to be supporting frontline workers who otherwise would be taking away from their workplace to do admin at home. We can help them with that. And that's been great for our employees to see the difference they're making, actually.
There's another question as well, which is related to something we've been talking about last week and the week before around performance management. So lots of companies are going through their end of year reviews at this time and having to obviously do that remotely. But there's a question around how you're doing that at Foxtons, and, you know, do you think that social distancing and lockdown will change people's objectives or how we've measured, you know, people's performance over the last few months?
It's an interesting question. I think objectives will always be there. We historically have had quite a light touch in our management style. So we introduced a really cool bit of kit this year, back in January. Seems like a long time ago, January, doesn't it? It seems like a lifetime ago, given the lockdown. A platform called Open Blend, which is half coaching platform, half performance management or objective setting. And that's quite a new thing for Foxtons. Historically, objectives have been managed locally within branch. We wanted to have a more consistent approach. I think if you've got people working remotely, objectives are really important. People like clarity, people like to know what they've got to deliver on. They also like to be rewarded for what they deliver on. I think that's really important. And we can recognise what talent are doing, who's delivering well, how do we promote the right people. So I think having a bit more clarity on objectives is more important now than ever before. But I think we also need to appreciate that it's been a challenging time for people, and that might impact performance, and we've got to be accepting of that.
Thank you. And then there's another question actually, which has probably stemmed from the previous two around recruitment. So you said that, you know, HR has been really agile. As a business, you're quite entrepreneurial. You know, how do you look for those things when you're recruiting actually? And I guess how do you keep those characteristics and maybe train and develop them?
It's an interesting one because entrepreneurialism is a great quality to have, but you don't have too much of it, otherwise everyone would leave to set up their own business. So you want entrepreneurialism, if anything, as a bit of an odd word, isn't it? You want people to be entrepreneurial within a corporate culture. If we hired everyone as an entrepreneur, we wouldn't keep them. They'd go and set up their own thing. We look for people who are salesy, passionate, driven, and they've got killer communication skills. And we do that through a really well-designed assessment centre through our recruitment process. We've used principles based in occupational psychology. My background is in business psychology. We've engaged teams of occupational psychologists to design situational judgment tests for us. We've used psychometrics. So we do kind of throw a lot of science at our recruitment process to make sure that we're assessing people properly. Previously, in a buoyant market, we've probably had a bit more of a relaxed, informal recruitment process, because when you hire in a buoyant market, it's easier to do the job. In a challenging market, you need really talented people to come in and do the job well and hit the ground running. So we've had to adapt our recruitment processes to the market and get far more robust with it. And we've done that in the last 2 years.
I love that. I'll hand back over to you, Tom. Entrepreneurial. I haven't heard that before. I love it.
So, Sarah, I've got to ask the $22 million or $22 billion question, which is, what is the prognosis? Are the teams busy? Is there a lot of transactions in the market? Are we seeing nobody being able to shift anything, or are we seeing a lot of movement? What should we be expecting?
Well, yeah, I think to be fair, you could read 5 different parts of the press and have different answers to that one. Depends which you read. I obviously read Estate Agent Today every day, which is, trust me, it's a good read. I learn all about the market. I don't need to know just about HR. I've got to know my industry really well. And Estate Agent Today published an article saying that Zoopla are seeing, more adverts coming in on the property ads, and they're seeing people increasing prices. I think it's very sector specific. What happens in London's different from what happens up north. What we are seeing in sales particularly is we saw an increase very quickly after lockdown, and that wasn't just pent up demand. We were seeing it increasing steadily week by week, which is great to see. There's a lot of stock, as we call it out there, lots of houses. And as a result, you can get some good deals out there. It's all about confidence in the sales market, actually, quite important. We are seeing a trend in sales where people are either looking to move to the country, move to the coast, and definitely get a place with a garden. They don't want to be locked in again. So that's a trend on sales. On lettings, it's never been probably a better time to be a tenant, if I'm honest. You'll tend to see more lettings and sales happening. In tricky times like this, people want the flexibility of renting rather than being fixed on a mortgage. So we are seeing a shift to lettings. Also, the student market affects it. We're waiting to see what the London universities do. When they reopen, are they deferring? That'll impact on the lettings market quite substantially. But for now, actually, I would say, it's cheap to borrow money. It's a good time to be a tenant, both for sales and lettings, because there are some deals to be had out there.
It's very interesting, isn't it? The lack of clarity on the student side is impacting loads of different sectors and businesses, because they have such a large impact in terms of people coming into London, but our other cities as well. And at the moment, it's very unclear, I think, what is the likelihood for September.
Yeah, weirdly, my husband works at UCL, University College London. He works as a cameraman, so he's doing very little filming, but lots of streaming. He's never been busier, actually, doing loads of video conferencing. And they're not looking to go back until December, January time as a member of staff. You know, they're looking at, UCL are really thinking about how they manage that.
Yes, and the communication to students and the overseas students, I think, is a bit slower than that, and it's very interesting because, you know, presumably at this point you'd expect all those deals to have been done, ready for the next year, and this year, if they are going to happen, they're presumably going to happen at the last minute.
Agreed, and I think that the challenge is you've got with the universities. I'm not an expert, so I probably shouldn't talk about it too much. But you've got the challenge of people now. You've got universities whereby they've demonstrated they can use video conferencing really well. However, if you're one of the top-notch universities, are people really going to pay that amount to just do it online? Why would they'd want a face-to-face experience, and that's a challenge. However, people are still going to be desperate for a degree from UCL or Oxbridge, whether it's online or not. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how they package that up.
Yes, very interesting, and the thing which so many people want to do is to get back to normal, and it's going to take a long time, I think, for the level of clarity people we're normally used to return. So that was very exciting to speak to you, Sarah, and give us some insights from Foxtons. It sounds like a pretty traumatic period, but it sounds like you guys are really kind of weathering it well, and that's great to hear. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to our audience, thank you very much for attending and giving up your time this morning. I hope that was useful. I certainly learned a lot. I love the idea of the intrapreneur. I think that is fascinating, and I love to hear the new story, which we're hearing in the last few of our webinars, which is of people opening up, being confident, restarting their business, and really driving forward. And that's really exciting. It felt like that wasn't going to happen during the first 5 or 6 weeks. So well done, everybody, and thank you very much for joining. There's a series of other webinars going on, which we advertise on our site, and we'll be doing this weekly, continuing to do this weekly as the crisis continues to unfold. So thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody else, and look forward to seeing you next week.